As you may or may not know, I've been fairly obsessed with artificial intelligence over the last, I don't know, 18 months or so. And we solicited some questions from Twitter, and many people asked about this. Have you gone down this rabbit hole at all? Have you thought about AI much? And there was one question I saw here, which was, given your research on empathy, how should we program an AI with respect to it?
So I actually hadn't taken seriously the AI worries, and honestly, I'll be honest, I dismissed them as somewhat crackpot
Mm.
until I listened to you talk about it. I think it was a TED talk,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and then and then, so thank you. That got me worried about yet something else,
No, good.
and I found it fairly persuasive that there's an issue here we should be devoting a lot more thought to. Um, the question of putting empathy into machines, which is I think in some way morally fraught, because if I'm right that empathy leads to capricious and arbitrary decisions, then if we put empathy into computers or robots, we end up with capricious and arbitrary computers and robots. I think when people think about putting empathy into machines, they often think about it from a marketing point of view, such that a household robot or even an interface on a Mac computer that is somewhat empathic will will be more pleasurable to interact with, more humanoid, more human-like,
Mm.
and we'll get more pleasure dealing with it. And that might be the case. I've actually heard a contrary view from my friend David Pizarro, who points out that when dealing with a lot of interactions, we actually don't want empathy. We want a sort of cold-blooded interaction that we
Mm.
don't have to become emotionally invested in.
We want professionalism. I think
Yes.
of our super intelligent AI, I think we want professionalism more than we want emotional contagion. You don't want, if you're anxious and consulting your robot doctor, you don't want that anxiety mirrored back to you, right? You want as stately a physician as you ever met in the living world, now
Yes.
embodied in this machine.
Yes. So I'm very happy if I have a home blood pressure cuff, which just gives me the numbers and doesn't say, "Oh man, I feel terrible for you." This must be very
Like,
upsetting.
whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I'm holding back here.
Yeah.
It's the machine starts to little graphical tears trickle down the interface. I'm sure people involved in marketing these devices think that they're appealing. I think that David is right, and we're going to discover that for a lot of interfaces, we just want a sort of an affect-free, emotion-free interaction. And I think we find, as I find, for instance, with interfaces where you have to call the airport or something, when it
Mm.
reassures me that it's worried about me and so on, I find it cloying and annoying and intrusive. I just want the data. I want to save my empathy for real people.
Yeah, but I think the question goes to what will be normative on the side of the AI. So, do we want AI? I guess let's leave consciousness aside for the moment,
That's right.
but do we want an AI that actually has more than just factual knowledge of our preferences? Insofar as it could emulate our emotional experience, could that give it capacities
I see. Yeah.
that we want it to have so as to better conserve our interests?
So here's my take on it. I think we want AI with compassion. I think we particularly want AI with compassion towards us.
Mm.
I'm not sure whether this came from you or somebody else, but somebody gave the following scenario for how the world will end. The world's going to end when someone programs a powerful computer that interfaces with other things to get rid of spam on
Right.
email,
Yeah.
and then the computer will promptly destroy the world as a suitable way to do this. Um, we want machines to have a guard against doing that, where they say, well, human life is valuable, human flourishing, and animal flourishing is valuable. So if I want AI that is involved in making significant decisions, I want it to have compassion. I don't, however, want it to have empathy. I think empathy makes us irrational. It makes us, among other things, racist. The last thing in the world we need is racist AI.
There's been some concern that we already have racist
Oh
AI. Have you
yes,
have you heard this?
yes, I have. Go ahead, remind me.
If I recall correctly, there are algorithms that decide on the paroling of prisoners and or whether people get mortgages, and there's some evidence, I could be making a a bit of a hash of this, but there was some evidence in one or both of these categories that the AI was taking racial characteristics into its calculation, and then that hadn't been programmed in. That was just an emergent property of it finding, of all the data available, this data was relevant. In the case of prisoners, the recidivism rate. If it's just a fact that black parolees recidivate more,
That's right.
reoffend more, I don't know in fact that it is, but let's just say that it is, and an AI notices that, well, then of course the AI, if you're going to be predicting whether a person is likely to violate their parole, you are going to take race into account if it's actually descriptively true of the data that it's a variable. And so I think there was at least one story I saw where you had people scandalized by racist AI.
When I was young and very nerdy, more nerdy than I am now, I like gobbled up all science fiction. And Isaac Asimov had a tremendous influence on me. And he had all of his work on robots, and he had these three laws of robotics.
Hmm.
And if you think about it as from a more sophisticated view, the laws of robotics weren't particularly morally coherent. Like one of them is you should never harm a human or through an action allow a human to come to harm. But does that mean the robot's going to run around trying to save people's lives all the time because we're continually not allowing people to come to harm? But
Hmm.
but the spirit of the endeavor is right, which is I would wire up. I think, and in fact, I think in some way, as robots now become more powerful, you could imagine becoming compulsory to wire up these machines with some morality. This comes up with driving cars. Sorry, with
Yeah.
with automatic drive, the computer-driven cars, where are they going to be utilitarian? Are they going to have principles? And there's a lot of good debates on that, but they have to be something, and they have to have some consistent moral principles that take into account human life and human flourishing. And the last thing you want to stick in there is something that says, well, if someone is adorable, care for them more. Always count a single life as more than 100 lives. There's no justification for putting the sort of stupidities of empathy that we're often stuck with to putting them into the machines that we create.
That's one thing I love about this moment of having to think about super intelligent AIs. It's amazingly clarifying of moral priorities. I mean, all these people who until yesterday said, well, who's to say what's true in the moral sphere? Once you force them to weigh in on how should we program the algorithm for self-driving cars, they immediately see that, okay, you have to solve these problems one way or another. These cars will be driving. Do you want them to be racist cars? Do you want them to preferentially drive over old people as opposed to children? What makes sense? And to say that there is no norm there to be followed is to just, you're going to be designing one by accident then, right? If you make a car that is totally unbiased with respect to the lives it saves, well, then you've made this kind of this Buddhist car, right? You've made the Matthew Ricard car, say. That may be the right answer, but you have taken a position just by default. And the moment you begin to design away from that kind of pure equality, you are forced to make moral decisions. And I think it's pretty clear that we have trolley problems that we have to solve, and we have, at a minimum, we have to admit that killing one person is better than killing five, and we have to design our cars to have that preference. When you put morality in the hands of the engineers, you see that you can't take refuge in any kind of moral relativism. You actually have to answer these questions for yourself.
I envision this future where you walk into a car dealership and you order one of these cars and you're sitting back and you're paying for it, and then you're asked, what kind of setting do you want? Do you want racist, Buddhist, radical feminist, religious fundamentalist?
I don't know if you've heard this research, but when they ask people what the cars should do on the question of, how biased should it be to save the driver over the pedestrian, say. So if it's a choice between avoiding a pedestrian and killing the driver or killing the pedestrian, how should the car decide? Most people say in the abstract, it should just be unbiased. You should be indifferent between those two. But when you ask people, would you buy a car that was indifferent between the driver's life and the pedestrians, they say no. They want a car that's going to protect their lives. So it's hard to adhere to the thing you think is the right answer, it seems. And there, I actually don't know how you solve that problem. I think probably the best solution is to not advertise how you've solved it,
That's
right?
interesting. Yeah.
I think if you make it totally transparent, it will be a barrier to the adoption of technology that will be, on balance, immensely life-saving for everyone, drivers and pedestrians included. We now have tens of thousands of people every year reliably being killed by cars. We could bring that down by a factor of 10 or 100, and then the deaths that would remain would still be these tragedies that we would have to think long and hard about whether the algorithm performed the way we want it to. But still, that we have to adopt this technology as quickly as is feasible. So I think transparency here could be a bad idea.
I think it's true. I mean, I find it, I know people who have insisted they would never go into a self-driving car. And I find this bizarre because the alternative is far more dangerous. But you're right. And I think there's also this fear of new technology where there'll be a reluctance to use them. Apparently there was a reluctance to use elevators that didn't
Right.
have an elevator operator for a
Right.
long time. So they had to have some schnook stand there
Yeah.
in order so people would feel calm enough to go inside that.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
but I agree with the general point, which is a more general one, which is there's no opting out of moral choices. Failing to make a moral choice over, say, giving to charity or what your car should do is itself a moral choice
Yeah.
and driven by a moral philosophy. I also just can't resist adding, and I think this is from the Very Bad Wizards group, but you can imagine a car that had a certain morality, and then you got into it, and it automatically drove you to like Oxfam and refused to let you move
Right.
until you gave them a lot of money.
Yeah.
So you don't want too moral a car. You want a car sort of just moral enough to do your bidding, but not much more.
Have you been watching any of these shows or films that deal with AI, like Ex Machina or Westworld or Humans?
I've been watching all of these shows
Mhm.
that deal with AI, and they all deal with Ex Machina and Westworld all deal with the struggle we have when something looks human enough, acts human enough. It is irresistible not to treat it as a person.
Mhm.
And there, philosophers and psychologists and lay people might split. They might say, look, if it looks like a person and talks like a person, and everything, then it has a consciousness like a person. Dan Dennett would most likely say that. And it's interesting, different movies and different TV shows. And I actually think movies and TVs are often instruments of some very good philosophy. They go different ways on this. So Ex Machina, I hate to spoil it, so viewers should turn off the sound for the
Mhm.
next 60 seconds if they don't want to hear it. But there's a robot that's entirely, you feel tremendous empathy for her and caring for her. The main character trusts her, and then she cold-bloodedly betrays him,
Mhm.
locks him in a room to starve to death while she goes on her way. And it becomes entirely clear that all of this was simply a mechanism that she used to win over his love. Well, for Westworld, it's more the opposite, where
Mhm.
the hosts, I guess, Dolores and others, are seen as they're really people. As viewers, we're supposed to see them as people, and the guests who forget about this, who brutalize them, they're the monsters.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think all of these films and shows are worth watching. I mean, they're all a little uneven from my point of view. There are moments where you think this isn't the greatest film or the greatest television show you've ever seen, but they all have their moments where they, as you said, they're really doing some very powerful philosophy by forcing you to have this vicarious experience of being in the presence of something that is passing the Turing test in a totally compelling way and not the way that Turing
That's
originally
right.
set it up. I mean, we're talking about robots that are no longer in the uncanny valley and looking weird. They are looking like humans. They're as human, and they are, in certain of these cases, much smarter than people. And this reveals a few things to me that are probably not surprising, but again, it's to experience it vicariously, just hour by hour watching these things is different than just knowing it in the abstract.
That's right. The best movies and films and movies and TV shows and books often take a philosophical thought experiment and they make it vivid in such a way you could really appreciate it. And I think that sentient, realistic humanoid AI is a perfect example of these shows confronting us with this is a possibility. How will we react?
I think it tells us how we will react. I think once something looks like a human and talks like a human and demonstrates intelligence that is at least at human level, I think for reasons I gave somewhere on this podcast and elsewhere when I've talked about AI, I think human level AI is a mirage. I think the moment we have anything like human level AI, we will have superhuman AI. We're not going to make our AI that passes the Turing test less good at math than your phone is. It'll be a superhuman
Right.
calculator. It'll be superhuman in every way that it does anything that narrow AI does now. So once this all gets knit together in a humanoid form that passes the Turing test and shows general intelligence and looks as good as we look, which is to say it looks as much like a locus of consciousness as we do, then I think a few things will happen very quickly. One is that we will lose sight of the fact of whether or not it's philosophically or scientifically interesting to wonder whether this thing is conscious. I think some people like me, who are convinced that the hard problem of consciousness is real, might hold on to it for a while, but every intuition we have of something being conscious, every intuition we have that other people are conscious, will be driven hard in the presence of these artifacts. And it will be true to say that we won't know whether they're conscious unless we understand how consciousness emerges from the physical world. But we will follow Dan Dennett in feeling that it's a no longer interesting question because we find we actually can't stay interested in it in the presence of machines that are functioning at least as well, if not better, than we are, and will almost certainly be designed to talk about their experience in ways that suggest that they're having an experience. And so that's one part that we will grant them consciousness by default, even though we may have no deep reason to believe that they're conscious. And the other thing that is brought up by Westworld to a unique degree, I guess humans also, is that many of the ways in which people imagine using robots of this sort, we would use them in ways at least we imagine that we wouldn't use other human beings on the assumption that they're not conscious, right? That they're just computers that really can't suffer. But I think this is the other side of this coin. Once we helplessly attribute states of consciousness to these machines, it will be damaging to our own sense of ourselves to treat them badly. We're going to be in the presence of digital slaves. And just how well do you need to treat your slaves? And what does it mean to have a superhumanly intelligent slave? I mean, that just becomes a safety problem. How do you maintain a master-servant relationship to something that's smarter than you are and getting smarter all the time? But part of what Westworld brings up is that you are destroying human consciousness by letting yourself act out all of your baser impulses on robots on the assumption that they can't suffer, because the acting out is part of the problem. It actually diminishes your own moral worth, whether or not these robots are conscious.
Right. So you have these two things in tension. One is that when it starts to look like a person and talk, it'll be irresistible to see it as conscious. You could walk around and you could talk to me and doubt that I'm conscious, and we could doubt that about other people, but it's an intellectual exercise. It's irresistible to treat other people as having feelings, emotions, consciousness, and it'll be irresistible to treat these machines as well. And then we want to use them. And so in
Yeah.
Westworld is a particularly dramatic example of this, where characters are meant to be raped and assaulted and shot. And it's supposed to be, fun and games. But the reality of it is these two things are in tension. Anybody who were to assault the character Dolores, the young woman who's a robot, would be seen as morally indistinguishable from someone who would assault any person. And so we are at risk for the first time in human civilization of, in some sense, building machines that we are then it's morally repugnant to use in the sense that they're constructed for.
Yeah.
It would be like genetically engineering a race of people, but wiring up their brains so that they're utterly subservient and enjoy performing at our will. Well, that's kind of gross. And I think we're very quickly going to reach a point where we'll see the same thing with our machines. And then what I would imagine is, and this goes back to building machines without empathy or perhaps without compassion, is There may be a business in building machines to do things that aren't that smart. I'd rather have my floor vacuumed by a Roomba than by somebody who has an IQ of 140 but is wired up to be a slave.
I think the humanoid component here is the main variable. If it looks like a Roomba, it actually doesn't matter how smart it is. You won't feel that you're enslaving a conscious creature.
What if it could talk?
It comes down to the interface. Insofar as you humanize the interface, you drive the intuitions that now you're in relationship to a person. But if you make it look like a Roomba and sound like a Roomba, it doesn't really matter what its capacities are as long as it still seems mechanical. I mean, the interesting wrinkle there, of course, is that ethically speaking, what really should matter is what's true on the side of the Roomba, right? So if the Roomba can suffer, if you've built a mechanical slave that you can't possibly empathize with because it doesn't have any of the user interface components that would allow you to do it, but it's actually having an experience of the world that is vastly deeper and richer and more poignant than your own, right? Well, then you have just the term of jargon now in the AI community. I think this is probably due to Nick Bostrom's book, but maybe he got this from somewhere. The term is mind crime. You're creating minds that can suffer, whether in simulation or in individual, robots. This would be an unimaginably bad thing to do. I mean, you would be on par with Yahweh, creating a hell and populating it. If there's more evil to be found in the universe than that, I don't know where to look for it. But that's something we're in danger of doing insofar as we're rolling the dice with some form of information processing being the basis of consciousness. If consciousness is just some version of information processing, well then, if we begin to do that well enough, it won't matter whether we can tell from the outside. We may just create it inside something we can't feel compassion for.
That's right. So there are 2 points. One point is your moral one, which is whether or not we know it, we may be doing terrible moral acts. We may be constructing conscious creatures and then tormenting them. Or alternatively, we may be creating creatures that machines that do our bidding and have no consciousness at all. It's no worse to assault the robot in Westworld than it is to bang a hammer against your toaster. But so that's the moral question.
But it still could diminish you as a person to treat her like a
Yes.
toaster,
Yes.
given what she looks like. And so raping Dolores on some level turns you into a rapist, whether or not she's more like a woman or more like a toaster.
Yes. So this is akin to this treatment of robots is akin to, I forget the philosopher. I forget who the philosopher was, but the claim was that animals have no moral status at all. However, you shouldn't torment animals because it'll make you a bad person with regard to other people, and people count. And it's true. I mean, one wonders, after all, we do all sorts of killing and harming of virtual characters on video games, and that doesn't seem to transfer. It hasn't made us worse people. If there is an effect on increasing our violence towards real humans, it hasn't shown up in any of the homicide statistics, and the studies are a mess. But I would agree with you that there's a world of difference between sitting on my Xbox and shooting, aliens, as opposed to the real physical feeling, say, of strangling someone who's indistinguishable from a person. And that's the second point, which is even if they aren't conscious, even if, as a matter of fact, from a God's eye view, they're just things, it will seem to us as if they're conscious. And then the act of tormenting conscious people will either be repugnant to us, or if it isn't, it will lead us to be worse moral beings. So those are the dilemmas we're going to run into, probably within our lifetimes.